Someday Angeline by Sachar. Chapter 9. Garbage. Christy Mathewson had her ears pierced. She came to school with little gold posts sticking through them. "They're real gold," she said to the circle that had gathered around her. "If it wasn't real gold, my ears would turn green." Angeline wanted to see too, but she was outside the circle. She either wanted to see Christy's gold earrings or else she wanted to see her ears turn green. "I have to leave them in for 2 weeks," Christy said. "I can't take them out for anything or else the holes will close up." "Big deal," said Philip as he pushed his way through the circle. "I wish your mouth would close up." "Drop dead," said Christy. Angeline tried to peek through the hole in the circle made by Philip, but it quickly closed up, just like Christy said her ears would if she removed her earrings. "Why don't you get your nose pierced too?" said Philip. "That would look real good." "Why don't you shut up?" said Judy Martin. Pretty soon the circle broke up and Christy was talking only with Judy Martin, mostly about what a creep Philip was, although they also thought he was kind of cute, but in a creepy sort of way. Angeline walked up to them. "May I see your earrings, Christy?" she asked. Judy Martin replied, before Christy could say anything, "Get lost, freak! Can't you see we're busy?" Angeline flushed. She turned and quickly went to her desk. She couldn't understand why people were so mean for no reason at all. And it wasn't even Judy whom she'd asked. It was Christy. "There's no reason to cry," she told herself, "just because she wouldn't let you see her earrings. It was just that she was always on the outside. She wished she could be an insider." Mrs. Hardlick came in and rang the bell. Algebra was first. Algebra would have been Angeline's favorite subject, except that Mrs. Hardlick killed it. Angeline tried to think of a way to tell her that she couldn't be Secretary of Trash anymore. "I wish to resign my position as Secretary of Trash due to family obligations. I must resign my position as Secretary of Trash." She stared at a poster that she hated. She hated everything about the classroom. She thought it was the ugliest classroom in the school, and it was the ugliest school in the world. The only thing she liked about it was being Secretary of Trash, and Gary, and Mr. Bone, and Mr. Bone's fish. "I can no longer be Secretary of Trash. I regretfully resign." She heard Mrs. Hardlick teaching algebra, but she couldn't listen to her. She hated Mrs. Hardlick more than anything. She thought of a joke Gary had told her. A man fell out of an airplane. Luckily, he had a parachute. Unluckily, the parachute wouldn't open. Luckily, there was a haystack underneath him. Unluckily, there was a pitchfork in the haystack. Luckily, he missed the pitchfork. Unluckily, he missed the haystack. She laughed to herself. She thought it was the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Angeline," said Mrs. Hardlick, "do you think algebra is funny?" "No," she replied. Actually, she did think algebra was funny, but not the way Mrs. Hardlick taught it. Mrs. Hardlick killed all of the humor in it. "It is all memorization," she heard Mrs. Hardlick say. "You have to memorize every answer for every equation." When the bell rang for recess, she walked up to Mrs. Hardlick's desk to tell her that she had to resign. She hoped she wouldn't cry. She took a deep breath to steady herself, but before she could speak, Mrs. Hardlick said, "Just where do you think you're going? You can't go anywhere until you've picked up all the garbage. I plan to give the room a very thorough inspection after recess." Then she walked out before Angeline could say what she had to say. Angeline looked around the empty room, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to get in trouble, but she didn't want to disobey her father. She started to cry. She saw the piece of chalk which Mrs. Hardlick had used to kill algebra lying on the floor. She bent down, picked it up, and examined it through her tears. "Garbage," she said aloud, and dropped it into the wastepaper basket. Mrs. Hardlick's algebra book lay open on her desk. She could tell it was the teacher's edition because it had all the answers written in it. She thought that Mrs. Hardlick probably couldn't figure out the answers herself. "Garbage," she declared, and she dropped the book in the trash. She tore the poster out of the wall. "Garbage," she said, and she crumpled it up and tossed it in the direction of the garbage pail. Judy Martin's A composition was tacked to the bulletin board. She ripped it down. "Garbage!" She ran back to Mrs. Hardlick's desk as tears fell from her face. She grabbed the blotter with both hands and threw it off the desk, knocking all of Mrs. Hardlick's books, paper, pens, pencils, paper clips, and gold stars on the floor. She broke a glass vase with a plastic rose in it. "Garbage!" she laughed. "Garbage!" she cried. She tore wildly through the room, pushing paper, pencils, pens, and books onto the floor. "Garbage! Garbage! Garbage!" she repeated. She pushed all the books off the back bookshelf. "Garbage!" She knocked over somebody's desk. She didn't know whose, then ran out of the room. She took several deep breaths. She stopped crying, but felt very lightheaded. She wiped her eyes and took a long breath and slowly exhaled. Then off she went to look at Mr. Bone's fish. And that's the end of Chapter 9.